A guy opened his eyes, wondering if what he was seeing was just a dream. In front of him was a girl named Elle, but before he could speak to her, the girl disappeared. There were several monsters in front of him, ready to battle. They approached the girl effortlessly while the young man questioned what was happening. An avalanche took over everything as if he were in a war scene. He didn't know what he was seeing and began to wonder if these were memories of a stranger. However, if that were the case, why were the memories so painful? Until the protagonist sat up in his bed, screaming, realizing that it was indeed just a dream. He looked around, trying to recognize the place he was in. The young man was confused. He got out of bed to understand the situation. Apparently, he wasn't trapped. And looking out the window, he ended up recognizing the city. The reflection of the young man in the glass surprised him. After all, that wasn't his face. And the boy cried out of nervousness. He didn't quite know why he was going through this and couldn't hold back his emotions. He was straining to remember who he really was when the image of a hooded hero came to his mind. He was embracing the girl he had called in his dream. Suddenly, he heard someone approaching the door. It was Elle, smiling, wishing him a happy 16th birthday. He stared at her, lost. All he said was, "Cat," which the girl repeated. Questioning what kind of reaction that was, he then noticed her expression. She approached him to ask if he was crying. The girl was quite worried and asked if everything was okay or if he had a nightmare. Our protagonist remained shocked upon hearing that voice and seeing the girl's face. Carefully, he approached, asking if she was Elle. This left her confused. Maybe he was delirious. But the hero couldn't believe that the girl was right in front of him. The heroine, Elle Moonheart, flesh and blood. This was impossible because she had died when they were still children. It was then that the memory hit him. He had traveled through time 100 years into the future. He was surrounded by vassals and lived the life of the 12th sage in the first seat of the congregation, receiving the name Chrome Chronogate, the first and only user of time magic of that era. His master congratulated him because he had become the strongest monster in the world, claiming that he had built an unprecedented theory of time magic, incorporating the power of many demon kings. So, without a doubt, he was the most powerful wizard alive. Still, when he became the strongest, it was already too late, because everyone he wished to protect was gone, and not even the country he lived in remained standing. But he would not surrender to that fate. That's why he decided to try to start his life over once again. And so, he ended up in that teenage body, shaking the girl to find out what day and year it was. She replied that it was the year 1200 of the goddess's calendar on April 10th. Elle was startled, asking what those questions were and why the boy had such a scary expression. He seemed to be completely losing his mind, and he even let out a laugh worthy of a television villain. He lifted the girl high, shouting that it had worked and he had finally managed to go back to the past. Dizzy from all the shaking, Elle asked what he was talking about because she didn't understand anything, but the guy was too excited to stop and explain. Chrome commented that now he could touch Elle as much as he wanted, being corrected by the girl, who said he couldn't do that and questioned why he was acting so strange. The protagonist hugged her tightly. When he finally let her go, he apologized, explaining that he was just happy to see her. This surprised her a bit. After all, they were always together. Seeing Chrome laugh non-stop, Elle couldn't help but comment that he was acting very strangely. His face had been so shocked that even she was surprised. The young man apologized. After composing himself, he appreciated that city from 100 years ago, Chrome's hometown, which was still very peaceful. He was confident that this time he could do things differently. After all, he was no longer the same little boy as before. However, he had to stay alert because the turning point for the events that would follow would be that day. Upon catching Elle staring at him, the hero asked if something was wrong. This made her nervous due to the cute drama. The girl said it was nothing, but the atmosphere around him felt different, and everything seemed a bit strange, as if her friend was now more mature. The comment surprised the protagonist a bit. Shifting the focus a bit, the girl praises him, explaining that he has always had a rather gloomy face. So, seeing him smile earlier made her very happy. His comment leaves our boy somewhat embarrassed, but he explains that if that were really the case, he would try to smile more often. And this time, it's Elle who feels awkward. To her, the boy was indeed acting strange, and she had said that so many times that he could consider it his new nickname. Elle finally remembers the breakfast she was supposed to have served. She asks the boy if he would still like to eat. He didn't understand why she was acting so formally, but instead of explaining, the girl just runs off. Being there was very nostalgic for the boy. After all, that had once been his home. Before arriving at the place, he had a tough life, Flashbacks of his guardians humiliating him come to mind, complaining that he was incapable of using magic. After being kicked out of the house, wherever he went, he was oppressed. So, he spent years of his life without a place to call home, at least until the girl found him and brought him back to life. Elle found the protagonist sitting in one of the city's alleys and asked what he was doing there. The girl extended her hand with all the kindness in the world and welcomed him. Back in the present, he is greeted by a couple who wish him good morning. It was Sirius and Reina, whom he also greets. The man asks what had happened, but of course, he couldn't explain that he was emotional seeing Elle's parents, who had welcomed him and given him love after 100 years. Reina ignores this strange behavior, wishing a happy birthday to her adopted son. Sirius also makes a point of congratulating him, confirming that the boy was turning 16 and stating that he had become a great person. These words leave the boy wide-eyed and teary. His parents rush to ask what was wrong, checking his temperature and making sure he wasn't sick. But the little one explains that it was nothing like that, and he was just happy to be celebrating his birthday with loved ones, which was a surprise because apparently it wasn't very normal for the boy to cry. After so many confusions, it was time to have breakfast. Our boy offers to help with the dishes, which Reina gladly accepts, but Elle gets in his way, calling him repeatedly, justifying that she could sit down. She seemed like a pet, and Chrome explains that he would help his mother first because it was quite difficult for her to carry everything alone. And then, he tousles the little girl's hair. Stubborn, she offers to carry the dishes in his place because it was the protagonist's birthday, and to her, that was only fair. So she arrives with a bit of difficulty in the living room. Seeing the girl somewhat clumsy with so many dishes in her hands, he asks if she didn't want help, but the little one declines, telling him to sit down. Suddenly, the boy was enveloped by a feeling of déjà vu. He was almost certain he had been through this before. And it didn't take long for Elle to drop all the breakfast on the floor, repeating the same scene that the teenager had seen in his past life. However, this time, he could help and intervene using a time manipulation ability, running to the girl quickly and preventing her from falling to the ground. He continues using his spells to go back in time before all of that happened. And then, the girl stops screaming, letting out a sigh of relief. Noticing that Chrome managed to catch all the dishes, surprised, the girl asks when he got so close to her. After all, he had been sitting in the chair a minute ago. He doesn't answer because he is more concerned about whether the girl is okay or not. But he was surprised to discover that he could use those abilities in his new life, as he had only tried on impulse. The protagonist asks if Elle had twisted her ankle, which she denies. But she was in a somewhat embarrassing situation, in a rather unfavorable position. She stands up embarrassed while Chrome tries to compose himself. Sirius comments that the teenager's movements were incredible, and not even a court knight would do something like that, making the boy laugh, asking if he was serious. But the blonde didn't leave room for jokes, questioning when he had become capable of doing that, as it was difficult to do something like that without strengthening magic. His words remind the protagonist that, at that time, he couldn't use any magic, so he had to be more careful. That's why he decided to reveal that he was managing to use a bit of that strengthening magic, which surprises Sirius, who jumps from his chair. This was very good news for him, and the boy hugs the teenager, praising him because he has always worked hard to achieve his goals. Apparently, the way he acted when this situation happened for the first time was very pessimistic. Otherwise, the adults wouldn't be so happy about the fact that he could use magic. Finally, after all this confusion, they were able to sit down to eat. While eating, Chrome thought that in his past life he couldn't protect anything or anyone due to the catastrophe that happened that night. Meanwhile, he was swallowing food quickly, and Reina asked him to slow down so he wouldn't choke. However, the image of his annihilated family wouldn't leave his mind. He never wanted to feel that way again, and this time, he would do everything to stop it. After all, that was why he crossed 100 years in time. He wanted to protect those happy moments that seemed simple alongside his family. Reina apologizes for asking the protagonist for help right after breakfast, but thanks him, explaining that she really needed it. But the boy said she didn't need to worry because he was happy to help, and deep down, he knew it was better to treat that day like any other for now. He offers to wash the clothes by himself if it wasn't a bother for her, and she is surprised, but he explains that since she was very busy, she could leave it to him. Noticing that Reina was staring at him, our boy asks if there was something wrong with that, but the girl just explains that the boy was very mature. And then she smiles, saying goodbye to the boy. She explains that she would go to the kitchen and makes it clear that if he needed anything, he just had to ask. The boy thanks her. He was finally alone, First, he wanted to focus on his magical circuit system to understand how much magic he could use with his body from that era. Their form was a little different compared to the future. After all, since childhood, his circuits had been distorted, so he couldn't use any type of magic. However, later he discovered he had a certain affinity for a specific magic, a magic treated like a fairy tale, and this was the magic of time that the boy was testing now. After the first test, he was able to analyze and notice that his magic flow had decreased a bit, but he could start. He invokes the retrogressive construction formula, extending the clothing to clean it with the help of the enchantment until it reached a satisfactory state. Apparently, he could use that time magic without any problem, even being younger. Thus, he continued with his cleaning. Nearby, Elle was running to get back home. She had been delayed while shopping and feared that her mother had already returned to cooking. After finishing washing the clothes that Reina asked for, the boy decides to wash his own shirt as well, throwing it quickly. Thanks to the reflection in the window, he realized he was also more muscular than he remembered, but he also trained every day as a knight apprentice, so it was what he should expect. It was then that he was surprised by a shout from Elle, and he asks what the girl was doing there. But she returns the question, wanting to know why he was taking off his clothes, to which the boy replies that he was washing the clothes, and while posing for the reflection, he thought she looked embarrassed. But the girl says that usually she was the one who played that role. He didn't understand the reason for so much embarrassment. After all, not long ago, they even shared the bathroom. Sometime later, the boy finishes the household chores, and since it was still a bit early, he decided to go train. Reina is surprised by how quickly he did the chores, but she doesn't ask many questions. As Chrome was a resident apprentice, it was natural for him to help, and it was part of his routine to practice with Sirius. Before leaving, he encounters Elle again, and she asks what he thought of her new apron, revealing that dinner would be a surprise party for the boy, who was enchanted by the girl's beauty. But he explains that now that she had revealed about the dinner, it was no longer a surprise. After this strange interaction, she leaves the house. It was odd to relive all that again, as he felt like he was in the background of ancient times. In his past life, that house where he lived was destroyed during the night due to a catastrophe. But now things were different, as Chrome had mastery over time magic. Suddenly, he noticed strange movement, preparing to combat an enemy attack. It was then that he realized it was just Sirius who apologized, explaining that he had sensed a different atmosphere than usual. He asks if the blonde had gotten hurt, but he denies it, explaining that he was fine. But the garden, on the other hand, had been destroyed, leaving Sirius worried because his daughter would probably be furious with him. The protagonist watched him closely. It was hard to imagine from his gentle behavior that the young man was a swordsman, but when he held his blade, he emitted a fearsome aura. Seeing him trying to arrange the flowers was at least nostalgic, and our boy only realized he had let that thought slip out loud when Sirius asked if he had said something, which Chrome denied. Changing the subject, the blonde suggested they start training, starting with checking the movements using a straw dummy. The protagonist positioned himself in front of the dummy, questioning how much he could swing the sword using his current body. He concentrated and pulled the blade. Then, Chrome jumped towards the scarecrow, swinging his sword quickly, while Sirius watched everything attentively. The boy was like a machine. Slicing that creature rapidly, he managed to move even faster than he thought, and thus delivered his final blow to the scarecrow, recovering while catching his breath. Sirius was left speechless as the young man asked how it had gone. He didn't quite know what words to use for that, so he explained that Chrome seemed different from the previous day. The tension in his shoulders and wrists had vanished, and Chrome managed to wield the sword correctly this time with beautiful fencing without deviating from the center of his body. Those compliments took the protagonist by surprise. His fencing was practically self-taught, so he was pleased with so many praises. However, Sirius asked what kind of training the young man had done to have such talent suddenly blooming. The truth was that all of this was the result of much real combat over 100 years, but he obviously couldn't say that to Sirius, who explained that the basics would be enough for both of them. The training was interrupted by another person greeting Master Sirius. Her image caught Chrome's attention. In front of him was a very beautiful girl named Labris, who looked at him with indifference. She was the daughter of the Duke of Scarlet, one of the 4 great families of the kingdom's history, and she was also a sort of childhood friend of the protagonist and Elle. He had met the girl in childhood. This reminded him of a day when they were trying to think of a place to go when he suggested the library, like the day before. However, the girl suggested they go to the lake, so the boy liked the idea and ran off. saying that whoever arrived last would be the priest's wife, having to listen to complaints about how that was unfair. Elle had arrived first, and the boy grumbled about her being fast. Meanwhile, the girl lost track of them, telling the two to wait. Once at the lake, the two children shouted that she had already lost, so she could take her time, no problem. In the midst of all this, the girl ended up face planting on the ground. And her friends regretted it, explaining that it was precisely for that reason they told her not to rush. 2 years ago, the girl, who had always been very whiny, started training alongside the boy under Sirius's guidance. She was a young woman who dreamed of becoming a court knight, despite being the daughter of the Duke of Scarlet. And it didn't take long for her talent to blossom, and in no time, the girl surpassed the protagonist in fencing techniques. Before he realized it, the girl had become beyond his reach, with social status and skills that ended up distancing them. She greeted the master, thanking him for his attention that day, and told the boy to stop because his giving up could be contagious. However, the boy approached the old friend, picking her up, celebrating the fact that she was free. Nervous, Labris told him to stop that right away, asking what was wrong with the boy and punching him in the face. Chrome apologized, explaining that he was happy to see her and that was why he acted that way. He had completely forgotten that the girl hated him at that time, to which she looked at him with indifference and turned her face away to avoid looking at the boy. Sirius interrupted this at least unpleasant reunion, to say the least, asking if they were ready, and explained that they would train more since it had been a long time since they had a simulated battle. He couldn't even finish his sentence properly as he was interrupted by the girl, who denied that possibility. She didn't want to fight against that perverted quitter. This last part left the boy somewhat offended. Labris explained that there was a very large difference in skill between the two, so it wouldn't be good training for her, who aimed to become stronger. The master explained that he knew how she was feeling at that moment, but he considered that his apprentice had also strengthened. He even believed that he might be stronger than the girl. This made Labris laugh and question if the boy was joking with her, because the protagonist couldn't even use magic. The girl turned to Chrome, asking why someone like him was even holding that sword, mocking him by asking if he was trying to play the hero, as he did when they were just kids. The girl still says that he couldn't even protect people. To his surprise, the boy retorts, saying he was sorry, but he still had a great reason for holding that sword. Impatient, the girl tells them to go ahead and have the simulated battle then. However, if she won, he would never be allowed to hold a sword again, which leaves Sirius stunned. Nonetheless, Chrome accepts without any problem. He really seemed to have gotten stronger, but Labris questions whether our boy really thought he could defeat her. He replies that he didn't know yet, but if that happened, he wanted her to be his friend again, like before. His condition provokes the girl, who asks what he meant by that now, but he doesn't care about her reaction and just asks if she had decided to accept or not, because to be honest, he wanted them to be on good terms again. She didn't know that this was because in his past life, Labris had also died young. The warrior agrees, but makes it clear that it was only because she knew she wouldn't be defeated by the boy, so she would end that battle in a crystal of gold. Sirius finally speaks up, asking if both were ready, and reminds them that despite being a simulated battle, they shouldn't go overboard. Chrome felt confident. After all, he had a chance to do things differently, as he always regretted not being able to see his plans through to the end. To be honest, he didn't think he would be a friend again just because the girl made a promise, but he would have a different relationship than last time, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve that. The two begin, and the girl is surprised to be disarmed by Chrome's sword right off the bat. Sirius only thought that maybe he could change the future. One day, he would kill Labris. She still couldn't believe what had just happened and questions the boy, who explains that he had just moved really fast. Without thinking twice, Sirius announces the winner, and Chrome asks his opponent if she was okay, to which she replies that she felt like she was surrendering, while the boy was relieved. However, the girl was not finished yet, and she pulls out 2 blades, stating that she wouldn't end it that quickly. Her strike surprises the protagonist. The girl charges at him, shouting. She, caught in a boundless magic of protection, cast by the protagonist, leaves her unsure of how to proceed. Sirius shouts, reprimanding the apprentice. He only realizes what he had done when he sees Labris sitting on the ground, realizing that the boy had moved with the help of a conditioned reflex. He approaches the girl, asking if she was hurt, but she seemed too angry with herself to respond, holding back a scream. Labris questions what that was. She had never seen the boy use that power and asks if he had been deceiving everyone all this time, pretending to be a quitter, and she adds, asking why he didn't stay with her if he really had that power. Her words make everything clear to the protagonist, so that was why she hated him. Labris had always been a girl who didn't get close to people, even though she easily felt lonely. So the boy blamed himself for not realizing the truth all this time. With his friendly voice, he approaches, explaining that he knew she wouldn't believe him, but until the day before, he had been very weak. And that's why he thought he wasn't worthy of being by that girl's side. However, while helping her up, he promises that he wouldn't run away anymore, and that's why he decided to start everything over. So she surrenders, apologizing for all the misunderstandings they had, and Chrome replies that he already knew, leaving her confused. But the MC says that she was an amazing girl, and even though she was a bit clumsy, he also knew that she always tried her best, something he really liked about her, and it was exactly for that reason that he would like to be her friend again. His words leave the girl flustered, and she tells him to stop saying embarrassing things, claiming that the protagonist was very weird and referring to him as Oni-chan. This mention doesn't go unnoticed, and it makes her even more embarrassed. Then, Labris runs away, saying she didn't know anything. Left alone, the boy wonders if he and his now friend would get along, and Sirius replies that he was surprised by the fact that he had defeated Labris so easily, but the protagonist justifies that his colleague had let her guard down. Something the master has to acknowledge because he knew his apprentice tended to be very arrogant, but he recognized that the pupil had moved in an extraordinary way, and even he couldn't keep up with the last movements. That's why he questions whether the boy was really Chrome, explaining that if he didn't want to answer, that was fine, but instead, he wanted him to fight against Sirius to see how good the boy was. Sirius explains that he wanted to see the boy fighting seriously, and he understands, affirming that he would fight for real. Apparently, in the simulated battle with Labris, the man noticed that the protagonist didn't make any effort. They start the fight intensely and Sirius gives it his all, even scaring Chrome, who retreats from the attacks. He uses his time acceleration power at triple speed to help. Both were very focused and sweat was almost pouring from their eyes. He quickly dodges another attempted strike from Sirius. Sighing, relieved, the man can't help but find him incredible. But as he thought, the magic he was using wasn't physical enhancement, as he still had the same strength as before. Upon hearing this analysis, the boy says that his master was a great observer, and the man continues, informing him that despite having a lot of speed, his sword didn't have a heavy attack weight, which meant it didn't double his strength. But now, he calls him to fight for real, using physical enhancement and shouting for Chrome to come at him with everything. He was even faster, and our boy resorted to time acceleration at quadruple speed, blocking his opponent's attacks. It was exhausting because that body wasn't yet accustomed to so much magic, especially considering that the blonde was able to keep up effortlessly. Sirius was focused on fighting the boy when he finally managed to bring his blade close to his face, sending him flying away. But Chrome doesn't fall, because he already expected his master to be strong. Even though he used enhancement magic to his advantage, his sword skills were no match for Sirius. He realizes that the reactions and judgments of the techniques of commotion were also quick. Moreover, the wielding of the ghost sword from the Manhwa style was present in his attacks. Sirius shouts, and that's when he realizes that Chrome would have to dig even deeper into his abilities using acceleration at duodecupla speed. It was as if he had simply vanished, leaving the teacher dumbfounded. The boy appears behind him, pointing his sword at his head and asserts that this was him fighting for real. Sirius thinks for a second before dropping his sword, conceding. The boy comments that indeed, his apprentice had gotten stronger. In reality, he never understood why it took him so long to strengthen himself, and Chrome warns that he didn't need to comment on anything if he didn't want to. But the boy continues, saying that looking at his sword, he could see how he wielded it, informing that that weapon was a sword of those who were not loved by the sword, trying to protect someone while shedding tears and spitting juice. Indeed, it was a gentle blade, and the boy had worked hard to get to where he was, something that Chrome confirms. Affectionately, Sirius asks him to remember that no matter what people said, he was already proud to have a disciple like the boy. However, being honest, he thought he had nothing more to teach about swords, but if he needed his help, he could always count on him. By late afternoon, the boy was resting a bit. He was happy to have witnessed Sirius fighting seriously and to check his magic and fencing skills, but it was already time to leave. Noticing that he was all dressed up, Reina stops the boy, asking if he was going out, which he confirms, explaining that he was going for a walk. Before that, He asked if he could take some seeds that were on the table, along with some scraps and bits of magical stone, which she allows. After all, she was going to try to throw that away. The woman asks if the protagonist had seen Elle around because she had gone out again, even though it was close to dinner time. Maybe it was just the desire to travel that the girl manifested from time to time, but the protagonist asks her not to worry as he knew where she had gone. The woman smiles, saying it was good to see him too. The boy looks confused, but Reina explains that he could take her home with him and didn't mind if he was a little late, saying how nice it was to be young and asking him not to worry. Chrome tries to ignore that strange atmosphere when he is stopped by Sirius, who asks where he was going. The protagonist was surprised by the fact that the blonde was patrolling the city, and Reina explains that he was going to a meeting with their daughter, which makes the blonde suggest that Chrome was going to play a very interesting game with her. The boy was clearly embarrassed and quickly said goodbye. While listening to the woman asking him to be careful, the memory that this had been the last conversation with his family came to mind. He was ready to cross the door when he decided to turn back, calling for Sirius and Reina, and thanking them for everything they had done for him, especially for adopting him without any blood relation. The boy opens his heart, saying that they had given more than he could ever repay, but he would never forget their kindness. Worried, the couple asks if something had happened for him to be declaring himself so suddenly, but Chrome says he just wanted to say this. Before he can actually leave, Reina asks if he would really go back home. He doesn't respond, feeling awkward with the unexpected question, until the woman realizes the absurdity of what she said, making the protagonist answer that of course he would, and that he would be back with Elle. Thus, he says goodbye. The young man walks through the city, passing by some children, until he reaches the foot of a tree. Observing closely, he concludes that it was there that the disaster happened. The place was quite flowery. Looking at the view from that hill, it was no wonder it was called Armada, the City of Flowers. When he was little, he used to play there with his two friends. He looked at the vegetation fondly, until he spots Ella, remembering that the last time he found her who had disappeared there. The girl finally realizes his presence, greeting him. Elle comments that it was very rare for her friend to come to that place, but he explains that he came because he was looking for her, and this surprises her. Then the little girl explains that Reina asked him to go get her. The young man explains that it was Reina who asked him to say that it was almost time for dinner, and the girl's reaction suggests that she hadn't noticed the time passing. Changing the subject, Chrome asks what she was doing there, but the girl confesses that she also didn't know. However, he doesn't believe her answer. The girl laughs, asking if that wasn't a bit strange, until she started with a weird talk, saying that she felt she had to go, even though she had no idea why. Chrome asks where she was going, even though he already knew everything the girl would say. And then Elle explains that it was because of the Demon King. She was supposed to keep it a secret, but still reveals to the young man that she was a heroine born to save the world. Realizing how much she was talking, she apologizes to her friend, knowing he was surprised by so much information. However, she laughs, noticing that he didn't seem surprised at all, and the protagonist tries to disguise it, saying that for him, it was all a shock. Of course, it was the first time he heard it, but now he had to maintain his composure. So he stands there, dumbfounded, questioning how his friend could be the heroine, Elle. And his comment makes the girl burst into laughter and ask how he believed her so abruptly. After all, even she had her doubts, because Elle and the Demon King were very important figures in the history of that place. The girl continues her explanation, informing him that for the good of the world, she would have to fight against this creature that would appear in the future. And for that reason, she would set off on a journey. The protagonist watches her in silence until the girl concludes that she really wanted to tell him this. Back then, Chrome was just a child who understood nothing, so those words didn't make much sense. But now, it was different. Elle insists that she really had to tell him something before leaving, but she stutters, getting lost in her words. And this brings to mind the image of the girl trying to reveal something to the protagonist. However, before she can say anything, the clock chimes, which was a sign that the monsters were coming. This is enough to make Elle interrupt her speech and get startled by the movements she observed in the city. This is because on that day, the first Demon King was born from the great labyrinth of Almada, and a great horde of monsters descended with him, passing through the city gates. Now, Elle watched that crowd of abominable creatures, wondering what they were. And then, Chrome reveals that the uncontrolled horde of monsters had begun. In the past, they had an estimate of 671 dead with a single survivor due to this catastrophe. Watching the movements of the creatures, Elle could hardly believe what was happening. After all, if they continued those attacks, the city would fall. So, the girl shouts that she needed to go there. And this indeed surprises the young man who asks what she was talking about. But the girl was already determined, because she thought that if she tried to fight the monsters, she had a good chance of succeeding. Chrome shouts for Elle, saying that she couldn't and asking her to stay, because he had no attachment to this, because the exit would be in vain, and Sirius would surely do something about that invasion. Meanwhile, the girl only says that Chrome should stay there and apologizes. However, it was her duty as a heroine. In the middle of the city, the citizens were terrified, watching the approach of the monsters. It didn't take long for the news to reach Sirius and Reyna about a horde of monsters arriving there. The creatures were frightening and kept advancing. The population was already desperate, worrying about finding places to hide. In the midst of all this confusion, Sirius shouts for them to calm down, informing that he would face the monsters before their arrival in the city, and he invites anyone who can fight to join him. Thus, the citizens begin to gather their weapons to protect the area. As he advanced for defense, Sirius wondered why the hell this was happening. The men leave the city vigorously, and it doesn't take long for the blonde to find exactly what he was looking for, a huge creature that comes towards him. However, he manages to stop it using his fighting skills. They were very close to the city, and the young man gives orders to slow down the pace of the creatures, no matter the cost. Soon, other monsters approach, and Sirius takes a fighting stance, warning his companions to pay more attention. It doesn't take long for him to see a war scene. Suddenly, amidst all the destruction, Elle arrives, surprised by what she finds there. She shouts for her father, who was fighting against another beast, using his sword with mastery to finish off another creature and raise the ground. However, he was so focused on this that he didn't realize he needed to worry about his back, and that's why Elle shouts for him to take a look. However, it is already too late, as an explosion occurs right there, throwing Sirius away and making him crash hard to the ground. This makes the monster attacking him smile. With that, the supposed heroine screams in terror. Hatred coursed through her veins, and she takes advantage of this to grab the fallen sword from the ground and slice that horrific creature. The blonde asks where she was, and the fact that her father was still alive surprises her. However, she knew it was still too early for him to fight again with so many monsters around. Thus, the girl takes his place, wielding the sword like a true professional. She screamed while protecting her father from any danger. One of the citizens involved contests the girl, as he thought they had no chance at all. But Ella asserts that she would stop those creatures even if it was the last thing she could do, because she needed to protect that city and everyone there. Her mother, her father, and especially Chrome. However, in the middle of her speech, a punch comes in her direction, hitting the girl's back squarely. This makes her scream. When she turned to see the creature that had attacked, she noticed it had a blade in the middle of its face. The girl spat juice and was horrified by that scene. Her father finished off the beast that tried to attack her. She didn't know how much damage those monsters had caused to her city, and she began to worry that they hadn't evacuated yet. Even so, she would not give up fighting. So, even limping, she continued with her sword, which felt even heavier. The creatures were now advancing even faster, and Sirius watched them closely. One of them even grabbed one of the citizens by the head to do the worst, and the city was already engulfed in chaos. Suddenly, a girl screams. It was Ella, who was now in rags but still insisted on fighting. The girl moved like a dizzy cockroach, and the beast did not retreat either. Amidst the rubble, Chrome searched for the girl. When he finally saw where she was, he was surprised that she was indeed fighting. He remembered when this event happened for the first time, and how he did nothing. He couldn't save even one person, much less stop Elle before the worst happened. When he finally woke up to life, he was the only survivor. But that was a long time ago. He finally managed to return to the exact moment he needed. It was then that he realized that the recent events had only been flashbacks, and he was still amidst the flowers next to Elle, and the girl says she needs to go. But this time, he would do it differently and scolded her, telling her not to do that. He holds the girl's hand, explaining that she didn't need to go. And when she tries to question, the young man explains that she didn't have to be a heroine if she didn't want to, because doing so would only bring her suffering. She didn't need to carry that burden. Even so, the girl insists that if she didn't do it, no one would save the city. However, the boy makes it clear that he would do it, leaving Elle confused. But he didn't have time for that kind of discussion and just said it was okay and that he would protect everyone from then on. She runs desperately to reprimand him, but before she can catch up, the boy is already far away. Using his acceleration ability, he runs towards the city, determined to have a good day. After all, he had reunited with Ella and her adoptive parents, who also seemed to be well. He takes a special item from his bag, a small piece of magical stone he collected at home earlier, and brings it to his mouth. Thinking also of Labrys, with whom he managed to reconcile, he uses his 7-fold speed ability to accelerate his movements even more, while thinking that if he used a mana crystal as a source of magical power, he wouldn't have any problems using high-level powers repeatedly. He would do anything to protect the people who were important to him. Noticing the movements around the city, Labrys wonders what was happening, and Sirius finds Reyna, asking if she is okay. When he notices Labrys' presence, he questions if something had happened to the girl, who denies it, but wants to know what was going on in the city. Then, his master explains that a legion of monsters was about to invade. Therefore, he would gather his equipment and leave as quickly as possible, and he recommends that the two women stay there. However, Labrys does not listen and runs out, being reprimanded by her master, because if she left, she might not come back. That girl was very stubborn, but he didn't have time to deal with that now and tells the woman to wait inside while he goes to the streets. While running outside, Labrys wondered where her friends were during this emergency. The monsters were already very close, and the citizens were becoming increasingly desperate, denying that those situations were even happening. It was then that they noticed movement in the city. It was Chrome using his high speed. He runs quickly, only stopping when he reaches the Legion. He had finally found them, and he was happy about it. Again, the boy invokes his speed. Sparks flew from his body as if they were about to short circuit. He passed through the beasts, slicing them quickly. He only stopped after finishing them all. Even his sword broke from that. However, there was still a small detail missing, and he comments that it had been 100 years. While facing the largest of the creatures, he states that he had missed it. Now, he would have to confront the first Demon King, the original dragon Verberos. Flashbacks of when his friend faced the ancient Demon King come to mind. He remembered the girl crying juice, and how she screamed, watching the beast roar. The girl ran towards him anyway, until she was eliminated by the beam of destruction thrown by the monster. When Chrome woke up, he was surrounded by rubble, and was surprised to see that thing from afar, observing its giant silhouette. But now things were different. He had more confidence and stated that he had missed the immense creature in front of him. The Demon King approached, asking who that was and how he dared to stand there with his chest puffed out, and stated that despite using mysterious magic, he did not seem to be the hero. Then the boy reveals that he was indeed not just a childhood friend of the heroine, and this takes the Demon King by surprise before he bursts into laughter, saying that the boy was a fool. Before he bursts into laughter, saying that it was nonsense, because no way, the boy would replace the hero. After all, he felt no magic coming from that fragile body, and yet he dared to fight against the monster, still laughing. Verberos was in denial. However, Chrome was not in the mood for jokes, and pulling out his sword, states that he would take down all the Demon Kings he needed to. His insolence left Verberos shocked. After all, an insignificant human like him could never defeat a king. He laughed again, explaining that the Demon King was an existence that all demons followed. It was a basic law of that world, and then decided to give a demonstration of the power a Demon King possessed, throwing his beam of destruction towards the boy, causing a huge mess. The creature acted with arrogance, telling him to behold its powers. However, something surprised. Amid all that smoke, the boy remained standing, but his expression was serious. Frightened, Verberos asked what was happening, to which our boy responded, questioning if he had seen a monster or what. But the Demon King could not believe it. He repeatedly asked why he was still standing and why he had no wounds. After all, he had used an unavoidable attack. But our boy lamented because he had already prepared for all of his attacks. Super angry, the monster prepared to unleash more of his fury, knowing that it was all nonsense. Then, he threw his chaos powers in the boy's direction again, but this time, the boy used his ability to stop time, freezing that power there. The light of power approaches, but it didn't matter to the protagonist who had put his body in a state of ecstasy, freezing the Demon King like a statue. He had done this because an object in ecstasy never changed shape, so it worked as a mechanism of absolute defense. After dodging the power, he asked if that was all the Demon King had, and the creature only grew angrier, as it couldn't believe this was really happening. The boy used another of his objects, throwing it in the direction of the Demon King. They were small seeds that were now scattered on the ground, and then Chrome used temporal acceleration, causing giant trees to sprout around the creature, which screamed, asking what the hell that was. But it wouldn't be swayed and was already ready to break the trunks when the boy used a time freeze, preventing the Demon King from moving those trees. Again, the dragon used its chaos power, trying to hit the protagonist. He gave it his all. After all, it was the only move he could make. But, as usual, Chrome dodged and started a conversation about the future that was to come. He wanted to talk to the boy about the first Demon King that beast wanted to become. Theoretically, he would kill the heroine, Elruna, and decimate her hometown as a prelude to the Dark Era. And that would be just the beginning of the State of Calamity. The Demon King questioned who that boy was, because his actions bordered on the impossible. However, Chrome did not answer that and just completed his reasoning, saying he would not accept that future. For now, the boy would settle all the debts of the past. The Demon King was still surrounded by the trees and completely exhausted, drooling from how much he had used his powers. Still, Chrome stood tall, provoking him by asking if that was all he could do. Then he stated that now it was his turn to show his abilities. That dragon had used its breath attack on him so many times that the atmosphere around him was basically infused with mana. So the boy decided to take advantage of that, activating magic through atmospheric mana, something he could only do now because of his 100 years of training. Noticing that movement, the Demon King panicked, questioning what all that power was. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, and kept repeating that he was the Demon King, and could not lose to such a small human, as he would not accept such an end. The boy replied that he was not wrong about that. After all, there was no record of the original dragon having been killed in the past. According to history, humanity only managed to defeat that dragon at the very end, and he revealed that he had thought about defeating that beast for 100 years. Verboros's eyes widened, while the protagonist invoked temporal acceleration, enveloping the atmosphere with his well-trained powers. Amid all this, the boy explained that no life could resist the passage of time. That was astonishing. And it was wearing down the Demon King's skin, who now only knew how to curse his opponent, commenting on his power. He had finally discovered that time was the source of Chrome's powers and was still in denial. While disintegrating, he questioned how many taboos the boy had broken to get so far in relation to his skill level, but the protagonist turned his back, telling him to screw off, and thanked him. After all, thanks to that creature, he had worked hard to become stronger, and thus, the first Demon King was eliminated. Returning to the city, the citizens were still desperate. Because of the time magic used, people were still talking about the possible arrival of those monsters. The boy suddenly stumbled. He had already expected that to happen, because his body couldn't keep up with the powers he had, until someone caught his attention. It was Ella, who quickly ran to embrace the boy. She was tearful, and stated that she was happy to see him safe and sound. After all, he had fled in the middle of their conversation and started defeating monsters out of nowhere. But the boy could only smile, realizing that his friend, who had previously died by this point, was there, confirming that the story that had happened. The protagonist stumbled over his words, before saying that he had gone back in time as the strongest hero in the world to change history, words that made no sense to Elle, and she tried to hit the boy, telling him to respond seriously. But Chrome could only focus on his friend's smile and decided to return to what she wanted to talk about in the flower mound before he left, but she changed the subject. As soon as the two arrived home, Elle's parents' relief was visible, and Raina commented that she was very happy that both were safe and sound. She runs to hug her mother, who asks if she was hurt, but the girl explains that she was fine. They also confirm that Chrome had not been injured, which is a relief, especially for the woman. Now, his entire family was looking at him with a light expression, and the boy was also happy to finally be back home. They walked calmly to settle in before resting, and one of the parents remembered to ask if Chrome had happened to meet Labris before he got home. However, the boy denies it. Nevertheless, they explain that she brought a birthday present for the protagonist, who is surprised. She widens her eyes upon realizing that the boy had made up with Labris, and they remember that in her past life, the girl lived in the capital, where she managed to survive despite the calamity. Apparently, the fact that she was still there was a result of the sudden change in their relationship. Chrome states that he would try to meet the girl to get her present directly the next day. Later, Sirius was deep in thought about some strange things that happened during the events of that day. First, a bunch of monsters appeared after the tremors. He had heard that a mysterious hero had defeated them all alone. The blonde asks Chrome what he knew about it. And, awkwardly, the boy lies, saying he hadn't heard anything. But Sirius finds this strange because he thought the boy might have some information. After all, he was right in the mountains when everything happened. However, they are interrupted by Rena, who asks them to set the incident aside and eat before the food gets cold. After dinner, the boy throws himself onto the bed, exhausted. Despite having spent the day pretending that nothing was bothering him, his body said otherwise. He struggles to get comfortable in bed, realizing it was time to give that teenage body a rest. In fact, it seemed he had strained his mana circuits due to the strength of the spells he used, but he just hoped this wouldn't impact his daily life. He quickly stretches out his hand, touching the walls to see if he could stop time there. With that, the house's structure would never change, so he wouldn't have to worry about any ambush in the middle of the night. While trying to rest his body, his mind was working, thinking that he couldn't let his guard down. After all, the second Demon King would be born in that land soon. And he knew that this phenomenon of multiple Demon Kings appearing was no mere coincidence. In the Association of Wizards, the boy learned that that world was full of magic, and the group represented the highest authority, filled with people without any moral limits. In his past life, he was the top executive of that organization. After taking the position, he was able to access some secret files, and there he discovered the connection between the association and the birth of the Demon Kings. This was because they were not simply natural beings, but calamities created by the Wizard Association. The next day, while having coffee, Sirius announces that he had been called to appear in the capital, which surprises his daughter. But the blonde explains that he needed to report to the palace about the events of the previous day and would also try to get a team to investigate further. Chrome suggests that he ask for help from adventurers in that city, as they could start the search immediately, and Sirius agrees that it would be good if it weren't dangerous. However, there weren't many adventurers there, and those who weren't very strong. Moreover, the blonde felt that everything that happened was caused by humans, and if something like that had really occurred, the city wouldn't have been able to protect itself alone. The boy was very detail-oriented, which was probably a result of his intuition, which was heavily used during his knight career. Being so close to the boy made our protagonist wonder if things would have been easier had Sirius been alive from the beginning in his past life. Rena, however, was worried and wished her husband wouldn't meddle so much, but he assures her that he wouldn't do anything too risky, something she hoped was true. The blonde promises that he would do his best to return home as soon as possible, and if anything happened while he was away, he could contact the Scarlet family in the capital. He calls for Chrome, asking him to take care of the city and his family while he was gone. He agrees without any problem. Meanwhile, far from there, Labris was resting. Her previous day had been tumultuous, and in the end, she didn't even manage to deliver the gift to her new friend. Additionally, she remembered when she ran out, ready to take down those monsters. She had used her immediate body enhancement ability, and while running, she wondered if the legion of monsters was really heading towards the city. But when she arrived there, she found something peculiar. The creatures had already been defeated, and she was surprised to find the bodies of the monsters. She couldn't help but wonder what could have happened there, when suddenly she was struck by an unimaginable power. Caught in a cloud of dust, the girl sensed another presence there. It was a person. She knew this was a dangerous scenario, but when she realized it, the young man who was watching had already finished everything. She managed to hear a piece of the argument between Chrome and the Demon King, so even though she didn't know who was fighting against the creature, and she observed everything carefully, she couldn't believe that a human was causing so much destruction. After all, that dragon was at the level of the Demon King and had been defeated very quickly. Moreover, she was worried about whether the human in question was an enemy or an ally, because if he was an enemy, she couldn't let him enter her city. However, she couldn't move her body at all. It was then that she realized who it really was amidst all that smoke. It was Chrome. Of course, there was some distance between the two. However, she felt that the protagonist was someone else, even though he had the form of the boy. She couldn't forget his face amidst the smoke, but her mind was filled with doubts regarding his true identity. Sometime later, Chrome decided to prepare for his next battle, training his sword skills, and as he expected, he still hadn't fully recovered. He didn't want to face any very strong enemies in those conditions, although he hoped he could explore a dungeon nearby. However, he knew it would be dangerous to get involved in any accident now, because there was only a week left until the birth of the second Demon King. The guy stared at his sword seriously, noticing a reflection of someone he knew very well. It was Labris without a doubt. but the boy didn't know why she was hiding behind a tree, so he decided to walk to make sure he was being followed, and his movement made the girl quickly step out from behind the stump, heading towards him. However, when she turned the corner, she came face to face with him, standing still. And Chrome pretended to be natural as he caught her by surprise. He pushed her against the wall to ask why she had been following him since earlier. Labrissa's expression was unfriendly, while the boy kept interrupting her to see if she needed anything from him. Awkwardly, the girl decided to play it straight, explaining that, the day before, and she was encouraged by the protagonist to continue. He commented on the birthday present that Reina had mentioned, explaining that his adoptive mother had already given a spoiler about it and about how she was looking for him to deliver it. And the girl explained that she had that, but there were other things they needed to address. Labrisse was carefully hiding the package to give to her friend, but soon she decided to hand it over to end that suspense, surprising Chrome with the fact that there was indeed a gift. He confessed that he hadn't expected to receive something like that from Labrisse, and while watching the boy smile at the delivery, she assured herself that they would be friends again. After all, it was a promise because she lost in their battle. Her tough girl pose didn't fool the protagonist. Still, she tried to maintain it, explaining that was why she prepared the gift and not because the boy was important to her or anything like that. When she opened the bag, she found very cute cookies and asked if the girl had made them, to which she replied that it hadn't been intentional. She just thought it more appropriate to give a cheap gift, and that was the best option. Chrome didn't take the ironic smile off his face, and that bothered her, but he soon explained that the gift was just like him. Although the girl had no idea what that meant, he ruffled her hair, saying that he was very happy and thanking his friend for the effort, which made her feel awkward, and the two ended up being caught by Elle. One of them even asked how long she had been there, but the girl was too shocked by their closeness to respond and instead asked if they were having something, but not in a romantic sense. She approached Labrisse, excited by the fact that they were on good terms. She was happy because her friend had wanted to make amends with the protagonist for a long time, something that Labrisse now hated. In any case, the girl was excited to be able to spend time with both of them together again, and so they made their way to the city. It had been a long time since the trio had gone out like that. However, Chrome made it clear that they weren't there for leisure, but rather to patrol the city while Sirius was away, something that Elle ignored, pointing to a free buffet with monster meat ahead of the group. She really didn't listen to anyone, that's why they continue anyway, until they pass by a stall where two merchants were commenting that the city's security had been ensured by a mysterious hero. The market was somewhat chaotic as all kinds of meat from various creatures were scattered around and the merchants were rushing to organize their sales. Chrome couldn't help but notice the small benefit that the near invasion had brought to the city, while Labrisse commented that the citizens there didn't care about anything and that she herself had worried for nothing. As they passed one of the stalls, the merchant recognized him, realizing he was in charge of the patrol that day. He remarked that the boy seemed a bit down and made sure he was okay. Ignoring the guy, Chrome asked if there was a problem or if he had seen anything concerning. The young man thought before responding that the tremors from the previous day had damaged his furniture and cracked a bit of his ceiling too. But the boy went deeper, questioning if the man had seen any outsiders around, especially anyone from the Association of Wizards. And thinking it over, the young man replied that yes, commenting on the rumor of the mysterious hero. He explained that apparently they were looking for this guy because a group was offering a good reward for him, which was curious, and it left our boy a bit worried as they were acting faster than he had imagined. But the guy commented that the supposed hero had something interesting for the institution, and even mentioned the saying that a wizard who displayed his powers would always be kidnapped. Still, it must be hard for the hero to know he was in the sights of these people, and our boy agreed, asking him to let him know if he learned anything else. Now he had the idea that the association probably wanted to eliminate him for good, and he had no doubt that they were interested in his magic. Labrisse, amidst this confusion, seemed to be looking for something. Noticing this, Chrome asked if something was wrong, catching her attention, but the girl explained that it wasn't exactly that. When the boy looked to the side, he found something that might be the answer to his question. It was a little girl who was hurt, and the protagonist asked if she had fallen. That's when he understood why his friend was acting that way. But Labrisse, cold as always, denied it, saying it would only be annoying if she started crying in the middle of the street. Before she could finish speaking properly, her friend had already gone towards the little girl, questioning if she was hurt, and she recognized him, calling Chrome by his name. before confirming that she couldn't stop bleeding. Trying to comfort the child, he told her not to worry because he would stop the bleeding with his magic. This surprised the little girl, who doubted the ability of the boy known as the loser in the city, and that comment made him smile awkwardly. But he soon approached, going to do what needed to be done to help, using his temporal abilities to heal that wound. The girl stood up, and our boy made sure she wasn't feeling any more pain, and the little one thought it was amazing, celebrating the fact that she was healed while Labrice just observed. She thanked him, and the boy asked her to be careful on her way home so she wouldn't hurt herself again. Throughout the interaction, his friend remained silent. She waited for the girl to leave before asking what had happened. For her, it was impossible that the boy had manipulated magic, and she wanted to know exactly what he had done. But he explained that it was just normal healing magic. However, she countered, saying she knew Chrome had no aptitude for that. After all, healing magic was something very rare there, and besides that, she had never heard of a magic capable of simply healing a wound immediately. That's when the protagonist realized he had made a very wrong choice of words because he didn't remember magic being that primitive back then. Fortunately, Elle shouted for both of them and he changed the subject, asking where she had been all this time. Holding some papers, she got excited, asking her friends to look. It was a list of problems she had made after talking to everyone in the city, and Chrome couldn't help but praise her for her social skills, as she had done that in such a short time. There were some simpler things on the list, like broken furniture and injuries, but the number of people affected was very high, so the girl got excited, telling them to go help one by one. By the end of the day, they managed to achieve their goals. Chrome thanked his friends for their help, who were equally exhausted, and he called for Labrice, apologizing for making her accompany the two of them all day, but confessed that he found it all quite fun, something that Elle agreed with, because it had been many years since the three of them had gone out together, and, being honest, she revealed that she wished this could continue forever, holding the girl's hand gently. Since it was already late, it was time for the girl to go home, and so she does. Meanwhile, in one of the alleys, 3 hooded men were watching the group's movements. The girl, however, walks back without worries. Lost in her thoughts, she remembers that she forgot to ask Chrome about the previous day, but that didn't matter, Now, just as her friend said, she only wanted that friendship to last forever. The wizards watch her closely, dissolving into the ground with magic, and following the girl as if they were shadows, until they finally manage to surround her, surprising Labrice, who questions what was happening. It was then that she realized they were the wizards from the association. The girl asks what they wanted, and one of the men laughs, saying she didn't need to be afraid, and after all, they weren't suspicious people. To her, it was now clear that before her eyes were the wizards from the association, and they confirmed this. This confirmation of who they were frightens the girl. One of the masked men concludes that the one responsible for the battle the previous day was Labrice, but she asks what the association wanted from her so suddenly, to which the man replies that he had heard that the hero of the city was actually a heroine, yet he doubted it could be Labrice, and the others comment as if she weren't even there that she seemed fit for it, as she emitted an aura surrounded by magic, but the doubt was not a problem, as they would soon find out if they were right or not. They make it clear to the girl that she didn't need to worry, she just had to answer a few questions, and they get straight to the point by asking if she was the mysterious heroine who ended the horde of monsters the previous day, and this makes her remember her friend's face, ready for battle, but she doesn't mention it, only says they were confusing her with someone else, being closely watched by the wizards, who soon explain that they couldn't discern what was true and what was false in her words. One of them states that humans are liars, but they couldn't detect lies. And it was even harder when the person was a chatterbox. And then they ask if the girl knew what to do to help them. But Labrice didn't know, and the guy says he could give her a hint with the help of a very famous saying, stating that it was easy to find the truth after breaking something. And this frightens the girl, who quickly prepares her weapons. Using the ability to strengthen her body, she charges at him using all her power. As her opponents were wizards in a one-on-one fight, the girl had the advantage, so she would need to fight them one at a time. One of the wizards also prepares using body strengthening, just like the girl, and pulling out his wand to cast his spells, which surprises Labrice, who is quickly hit by that brute force and thrown against one of the city walls. The girl screams in pain. She couldn't believe she had been hit by such a strong magic. Level 6. It was then that she noticed a small detail. One of the guys had a first-class wizard insignia, She knew that this type of sorcerer was not uncommon, but now she was surrounded by 8 of them. They wasted no time advancing on the girl, still lying on the ground, using a spell to erase the girl. While she thought about how bad the situation she was in was, the girl wished to find her friend to help her. It doesn't take long for Labrise to fade, collapsing on the ground, and one of the wizards asks his master's guidance on what to do with her, which makes the others burst into laughter. And the superior comments that she would be a great conduit for them, so the idea was to take her as a candidate because maybe she could reach the demon royalty. They carefully approach one of the houses in the area, and one of the hooded men says that one of the possible mysterious heroes lives there. Moreover, there was a rumor that the girl who lived in the house was the heroine, and they might be the same person. So it might be a good idea to invade that house while the swordmaster was away from the city. And so, they proceed, using a spell to cover the residence. With this, nothing could be heard from the outside. Regardless of what the wizards did, they were furious because that mysterious hero had become a major obstacle in their evil plans. While one guy comments that it would be good if they could just get rid of the hero, he notices that one of the wizards wasn't paying attention, and the guy takes off his mask, stating that this was nonsense. After all, they were first-class wizards, remembering that even Labrise, who could use level 5 magic, was not capable of stopping them. So I wanted permission to finish off the mysterious hero once and for all, and thus he invokes a fire spell, being reprimanded by the guys, because that was a level 6 magic, and in that way, it would end up burning everyone. But Hudges didn't care and claimed they could count it as a failed attempt if everyone burned to ashes. However, before he could unleash flames all over the place, his wand goes kaput, which catches him by surprise. He even wonders if he did something wrong, but this kind of thing didn't happen to him, until a surprise element asks what the wizard's objective was, entering that house, scaring Hudges, who jumps back, and Chrome, completely hooded, appears in front of the wizard, who wondered when he had arrived there. The protagonist confirms that those guys were from the Wizard Association and comments that he spared a good part of his work by going to the city. Pointing his wand at the opponent, Hudges questions who the hell he was, while Chrome stared at him seriously. Hudges glared at him with hatred, while the boy muttered to himself that he must be from the congregation, and explains that he received information that his childhood friend had not yet returned home, and he was sure that this was the work of the boy in front of him, who was grinding his teeth in nervousness. He couldn't understand how that power suppressed his own. After all, he didn't feel any mana coming from the kid. That's when he remembered a very important detail. He knew that there was someone from the Moonheart family who was incapable of using any type of magic. This gave him more confidence to mock Chrome, saying that he didn't feel any mana coming from him, and even laughed, explaining that the boy almost surprised him. However, he admired the courage he had to face first-class wizards, considering his magical situation. This surprised the boy a little, who asked if they were really high-ranking wizards, but Hudges, despite confirming, said that even if he had realized this now, it was already too late. Noticing the silence, he asked if a cat had eaten the protagonist's tongue, and he also commented that the look of despair on that little girl's face earlier was hilarious. This provoked Chrome's wrath, who asked what they had done to his friend. But that was the information Hudges wasn't sure about, so he just commented that maybe she had passed on to a better place. But what Chrome took from that was that she was probably still alive. Still, for the wizard, that information would be useless. After all, he intended to kill the boy in front of him at that very moment. He intoned his spells, forming a large ball of light, claiming that he could take that vision as a little souvenir to hell. Then he threw the spell at the protagonist, but to his misfortune, he was very slow, being stopped by the boy who surprised Hudges. The wizard wondered how the spell had disappeared. In reality, it was as if he hadn't even started casting it in the first place. Noticing his reaction, Chrome confessed to being surprised, and asked if that was the low level of first-class wizards these days, because the guy had wasted a lot of time trying to provoke a level 6 spell. This mockery irritated Hudges, who finally realized what was happening, and shouted, asking if that boy with no mana had erased his spell. But all Chrome had to say in response was that he now knew how pathetic his opponent's magic was, which reminded him of something very important. Back then, wizards still depended on their wands to cast any type of spell, so he took care of that quickly, shattering Hudges' wand, which fell to the ground in shock. He shouted for his other friends to hurry and help. However, he hadn't noticed a small detail. They were all lying on the ground. The boy was startled, asking when that had happened. he was completely scared and now alone, and thought that this boy probably was part of the congregation. It didn't make sense, because since he appeared out of nowhere, he had only been talking to him, but he hadn't seen when he attacked his colleagues. He asked what the hell was going on, reaffirming that the guys there were all first-class wizards, and calling Chrome a monster. But the boy warned that he wasn't there to kill any of them after all. Disposing of a corpse was very expensive, and he probably wouldn't feel good doing that. So instead, he had another idea. He would destroy the magical circuits of those individuals, which scared Hudges, because until then, no one had discovered how to do that. He stared at Chrome intently, thinking that it couldn't be him, the hero from the previous day. Otherwise, he would feel some mana flowing from his body. As the protagonist began the destruction process, Hudges screamed that he couldn't do something like that because he wouldn't be able to live without any magic. But the MC didn't care, and even thanked them for placing the sound barrier there in his favor, because that way he wouldn't have to worry about the noises they made. The desperation was so great that Hudges begged him to kill him, but at least let him die like a true mage. Chrome didn't seem to even hear his useless pleas, very focused on the magical circuit destruction spell. Seeing so much mana materializing in front of him scared Hudges, who confessed that he thought the boy's inner mana was 0. But now he was facing someone very powerful. After resolving this issue, the boy roamed the city. When Elle asked if he had found Libresse yet, something that hadn't happened yet, and he explained that he even asked some locals, but it seemed that the girl had left the city. The girl was very worried that something bad had happened, but Chrome knew that if any incident had occurred, Libresse would handle it. Moreover, he already knew where she was, because he ended up finding a stranger who said he saw where the girl went. This surprised Elle. Then he stated that he would find her at that moment. However, the girl questioned whether it wouldn't be dangerous, and confirmed that the boy wasn't planning to look for a fight alone, leaving him feeling awkward. Then she asserted that she could fight too, extending her hand, and forming her bow and arrow imbued with mana. Elle complained because she didn't want to just sit there, waiting for things to happen, and observing the girl, Chrome knew she was strong enough to fight. Even though she hadn't had her realization the girl was the hero's conduit. Still, he didn't want her to take risks, so he explained that it was fine, because he wouldn't do anything as dangerous as the girl's imagination suggested, and he asked her not to worry and just wait for him there, leaving Elle displeased. Even so, she apologized for saying selfish things, but the boy comforted her, saying he didn't find anything selfish about his friend's concerns, and her worry made him happy. Saying goodbye, Elle stated that she would stay awake until they both returned. The boy finally left, concluding that, as he thought, Libresse had been captured by the congregation of mages, and according to what Hudges said earlier, she was still alive. It was just a bit frustrating not to have obtained any more information about it. They probably took her to the secret base of the institution. In the future, he had already investigated its location, so he just needed to reach the underground labyrinth of the city of Armanus, where the calamity originated, as the sorcerers must be researching ways to bring the Demon King back inside there. And probably they kidnapped his friend to speed up that process. In the original events, it should take another week for the new Demon King to emerge. However, the congregation must be working hard to use Libresse as the vessel for this Demon King. He couldn't say for sure that she was safe, but as long as she was alive, it wasn't a big problem. It didn't take long to reach the location, catching the attention of 2 mages guarding the door. One of them quickly extended his wand to ask what the boy was doing there, but the other said it was just a kid, they didn't need to worry. Without ceremony, Chrome used the time pause to proceed with his plan, passing by those 2 fools without difficulty. From there on, he would make everyone regret even touching his friend. That dungeon was of a low level and had 12 floors in total. Our boy had no trouble opening the doors, but he knew that his friend was probably deep inside the place, which meant he would have to pass through all 12 floors. Chrome walked attentively, noticing that there were many traps in the middle, but that wasn't going to stop him, so he used his speed ability to face the first floor, running at the speed of light, while several arrows were shot in the middle of the way, but nothing could reach him. The mages who had already noticed his presence wondered what had happened, because the traps weren't working, which indicated that something had happened to the spell placed in the dungeon. Upon seeing Chrome, they shouted to try to stop the invader, but that didn't work because he continued passing through those mages without difficulty. One of the guys even wondered if he had disappeared. However, his colleague warned that the boy was behind them. They didn't even have time to think before Chrome used his acceleration ability. destroying the wands of those sorcerers and leaving them powerless. The protagonist still acted tough and explained that he needed them to calm down, stopping time again on that floor, just like he did at the entrance. With the first challenge defeated so quickly, the boy concluded that he would reach the 12th floor in about 20 minutes. The boy climbed the stairs with the same speed he had crossed, fearless in his quest to save his friend. It was then that he encountered a bunch of creatures, shocked that the monsters that had dissipated after their horde's defeat in the city had already revived. But one creature caught his attention in particular. It was a chimera, a creature with too much mana to be in a low-level dungeon like that. For this type of monster was like a surplus from the birth of the Demon King. It was then that he remembered that Labris might already be used as a conduit for the Demon King. Even in his past life, the boy had faced the woman, who had become the 10th Demon Queen, known as the Princess of Purgatory, Scarlet. These memories of their encounter came to his mind, and the young man wondered how she had reached that point. With his sword embedded in the girl's chest, he pleaded for her to let him give her a dignified end at least, spraying her blood all over his face. However, in this new life he had gained, he did not want to have to kill Labris again. A scream from the chimera caught his attention, as did that of other mages who located the intruder. They asked how Chrome had gotten there and what had happened to the guards who were theoretically in the way. When they moved to inform their master, the protagonist used the same technique as before to stop time, crossing the room without being hit by any creature. The mages were impressed by the boy's speed, who stated that the sorcerers from 100 years ago did not expect their base to be invaded in that way. But this only confused the young men further. Without wasting time, Chrome tore apart one of the creatures by himself, sending its remains flying through the air, and frightening the hooded figures even more, who needed to know who the hell that boy was. When one of the sorcerers reached Master Number 6, he quickly informed him that someone had invaded the dungeon, but the old man merely commented that he did not know his subordinates were so weak, causing the boy to stutter. The superior told him to calm down. After all, he was a mage, and there were several security systems in that dungeon. Moreover, there were over 50 sorcerers there, ranging from 3rd class to 1st. However, the boy warned that they were unable to contact the guys from the 5th floor up, so the intruder was probably already on the 6th or 7th. This information put the old man on alert, and he questioned how many intruders there were, and upon hearing that it was just one guy, he became indignant. He could not comprehend that a single intruder had reached the 7th floor, taking down several mages in his path. So perhaps he was the hero of that time. The old man remembered that Hudges and other first-class mages had gone to the city in search of this hero and asked if they had managed to meet. But he did not wait for a response, as he needed to think about what to do to stop this guy, until someone spoke up, asking to be allowed to handle that hero alone. It was an old man with a mocking smile, sure that he would take care of that mage controller. However, Master Number 6 questioned whether Reigns could really handle the whole situation, but the old man asked him not to worry because he had already been in charge of defending that labyrinth before, so it was just a matter of continuing with the protocol. However, the master argued that the intruder could be responsible for the death of the originating dragon, but this did not scare Reigns, who simply asked the guy to calm down, because despite being called a hero, he was nothing more than a human. What really worried him was the fact that he did not know what tricks the boy had used to invade that base alone. And this was something that Master 6 understood very well. Thinking for a moment, the boy with armored eyes came to a conclusion, explaining that, for the boy to have managed to pass through that dungeon full of mages and traps, the protagonist was probably using the same type of spell. And if he continued doing this on all levels, his mana level would drop drastically in a second. The boy must have been so desperate that he was using magic indiscriminately to get through the levels, so he must have been just an amateur. For this reason, they could calm down. Moreover, the two did not care about the number of low-level mages being eliminated in the process, as long as the intruder did not reach the laboratory. With Master 6 calmer, he thanked his colleague, who added that, with the hero weakened, it would be even easier to finish him off. Moreover, with his manipulation magic, being the controller of sorcerers, they could even turn that hero into a slave. And just the thought impressed Master 6. In addition to all this, they didn't need to worry, because a teleportation circle was the only way to enter and exit that place. Calmer, Master 6 leaves everything in Rain's hands. Rain steps into the circle without hesitation, teleporting to another level of the dungeon. Meanwhile, our boy passed by the wizards as he had since the beginning. However, he was a bit worried that his mana had weakened, which was an indicator that they were indeed exploring Labris for their experiments. But that was not a good sign. One of the sorcerers tries to hit him, but just like all the others, he has no success, as Chrome takes them down. He had finally finished with the 7th floor and could move on. Upon reaching the 8th, he found something surprising. A group of wizards was casting a powerful spell that could burn everything to ashes. Even so, he did not intimidate, observing everything with a grim look and acting quickly. So quickly that the group didn't even realize they were already celebrating the invaders' defeat. In the midst of the smoke, he was sure that not even Chrome's ashes remained, at least until it cleared, revealing the protagonist's figure intact. The guys were in shock. After all, that was a level 9 spell, and yet the boy remained untouched. Meanwhile, at the other teleportation base, Reigns re-emerged, thinking he would face the hero who stopped the horde of monsters alone. He must have a lot of courage to do those wicked things to the creatures that the old man had cultivated for many years, but he had arrived at a great time, because Reigns was eager to test the wonders he received from his master Cradle. The old man pulls those creatures with his chains as if they were animals. Very excited about the possibility of testing these gifts, which were supreme lives created by Cradle Dester, one of the 12 sages, the Sage of Life. And then he frees them, referring to the monsters as beautiful and perfect forms of life. After all, those hybrid beasts combined the strengths of all kinds of creatures, and each of them was a rival of the strongest adventurers in that nation. Then, chanting with his wand, he begins the work, casting his spells to make those beasts even stronger, maximizing their abilities to the fullest, before activating the command that made them basically his slaves. And as soon as he had an opening, he would activate this last spell, just waiting for the hero. He intended to dissect him and rebuild him until he became his most loyal servant. Observing everything, Master Six only thought that Reigns was uncontrollable, and perhaps he could even defeat the hero in a fair fight. However, letting the crown command, he had a better chance of winning. Now, it was time to proceed with the plan. He gathers some wizards, explaining that this invasion caused a small stir, but there was no problem, so they could begin, gathering some of his subordinates. One of them pushes a stretcher, and the image makes the master smile. Observing Labrise lying there, he comments that she seemed to be a very promising conductor, and he knew that with this feat, he would get even closer to occupying a seat among the 12 sages. Meanwhile, the old man placed a protective barrier there so the hero couldn't reach him. He was already singing victory, and all that was missing was for Chrome to appear. As soon as he finished saying these words, the boy appeared as if he had been summoned. Even covered, it was possible to perceive the hatred in his heart. Reigns stammers while asking who that was, surprised that the invader in question was a hooded little boy, and he doesn't waste time sending his monsters to finish off the boy, something they do without questioning due to the spells placed by the old man. However, the beasts begin to disintegrate in the air, even though the invader was motionless, which leaves Reigns shocked. He asks how the boy had done that because his mana should have run out by that point, and he wanted to know what kind of sorcery that was. However, even so, he tried not to panic, as he knew he could still make the boy his slave using just one spell, and he would take advantage of the fact that Chrome's guard had lowered after defeating the chimeras for that. Then, the guy raises his wand, motivated. However, the boy attacks unexpectedly, destroying his magic circle. Chrome approaches, and with a simple snap of his fingers, he manages to damage the barrier. The cracks that appear in that giant bubble scare the old man, who still tries to remain calm as he knew it was a high-level spell. So, as long as the boy didn't invade it, he could proceed with his plan. He just didn't expect that Chrome would use time acceleration against him, causing him to scream. He felt his mana disappearing much faster, and thus, he knew that the barrier wouldn't last for long. After having made that giant bubble crack, leaving the wizard completely unprotected. I couldn't believe I was being taken down by a kid. It only took 5 seconds for him to overpower me, and I still didn't know how he had managed to gather so much mana to cast those powerful spells. But that didn't concern Chrome, who continued with his movements, gathering all the possible powers around him to use them to his advantage. He was drawing mana from the external environment. However, at that time, wizards still thought that was impossible to do. While that was happening before his eyes, Reigns tried to think of a way to escape, but he was struck by a vision almost celestial. The boy's eyes closed briefly. Before opening again, a large clock took over his iris. It was the magic of time materializing in front of the crown. He thought it was very beautiful despite being at a disadvantage. The memory of a certain day comes to mind, where Labris was running, wondering what she should do. The girl was in the middle of the forest and had gotten lost, when she hears a noise that catches her attention, but discovers it was just a little bunny. Although it looked a bit worn out, this relieved her. She asked it not to scare her like that. While exploring the forest, she was almost certain she could use her sword skills to her advantage if needed. However, she hears another noise, and this time it certainly wasn't any little bunny. In fact, it was a gigantic creature, an abominable beast that was carrying the poor bunny in its mouth. Labris was shocked to find a monster of that size in the middle of the forest, and she was forced to watch it swallow the poor bunny. The girl wondered why there was such a monster there, and when she tried to move, she realized her body was paralyzed. She had no idea why, but that wouldn't stop the beast from advancing, until someone appeared, shouting her name. It was Chrome, with fire in his eyes, and the girl was surprised again, but this time by the presence of her friend. He assured her that everything was fine, because he was there now, and he charged at the beast, saying he wouldn't let that creature even touch the girl. After a while, the monster's juice dripped to the ground, thanks to the protagonist, who sat down exhausted after fighting that beast. Finally, Labris's body moved, and she hugged her friend, grateful for his help. The poor girl had been crying out of fear of dying, but he explained that everything was fine now, and the monster was gone. Even so, she felt guilty, and for that reason, she apologized for being too weak. But that wasn't a concern for her friend. In fact, he said he was weak too, and because of that, he might not be able to be with her forever. Even so, he wanted to make a promise. Whenever Labris cried, he would be there to save her. In return, all she had to do was smile. The girl promised she would do that, slowly awakening from a deep dream. She was completely disoriented, and it was then that she realized her reality was quite unfavorable. She was handcuffed in a dirty place. It was then that she remembered she had been captured. There in that prison, she wondered what exactly that place was. By the size and the giant test tubes, she imagined it was a research laboratory. It was also full of cultivation tanks, and in one of them, she noticed the presence of something very strange. It looked like a monster's fetus. What it implied was that the other tubes contained various little monsters. Perhaps they were using the mana from the labyrinth to create them, which meant that the horde of monsters that attacked the city could have come from there. Noticing a movement beside her, something alerted the girl even more. She realized she was being held by the wizards of the congregation. One of them explained to the subordinates that in a few centuries, a turning point would occur in history. That would be the appearance of a creature known as the Demon Lord, and their goal was to create an artificial lord. That was the purpose of the Demon Coronation Project. That conversation was very strange for Labris, and the old man continued saying that all those present there were fortunate souls who would have the opportunity to become the second Demon Lord. And that last part caught her attention. He opened a drawer full of syringes, informing that those were some cells from the ancient Demon King, and they had obtained these cells through the fossil of the original, the originating Dragon Verberos, since its special ability was evolution. And by injecting those cells, the essence of the wizards would evolve, and those compatible would ascend to become the new Demon Lord. This discovery left the apprentices flattered, thanking for the privilege of entering the test, something Labris found sickening. The idea was to evolve from the human race to eliminate all inferior races afterward, and create a new ideal world that would be governed by this Demon King. The old man gets excited, shouting that it was time for the world evolution to begin. One of his minions removes the hood, being chosen to start the test, something he accepts without a second thought, receiving the injection directly in the neck. However, receiving those genes makes the boy's head explode, leaving Labris worried. Yet, the master remained calm. To him, that was just an incompatible guinea pig, and he moves on to the next, who doesn't even have time to react to the sting, meeting the same fate as his companion. The old man continues successively, and the laboratory ends up turning into a juice bath. Seeing all that, Labris was already ready to be the next to die, fearful of her fate. Finally, Master Number 6 arrives at her, commenting that it was quite difficult to find a suitable successor. However, she had been chosen by Master Cradle himself. The girl tries to save herself, telling the old man to stop, but he mocks her, asking why she was in a bad mood, and claiming that she should be grateful because this was quite a moment in her life. Moreover, he was sure that the girl would be able to adapt to those cells and evolve to become the second Demon Lord. Of course, his original desire was to create someone directly from the congregation. But since that wasn't possible, this was the way. Even alone there, the girl screams, asking for help from whoever it might be, only for the man to make it clear that no one would help, claiming that her friend was already dead, probably being dissected by one of his compatriots. Referring to Chrome as the hero, the girl concludes that it was all a lie. She couldn't believe that Chrome's fate had been sealed, and then she screams for her friend's help. But as he approaches Labrice's neck, the old man repeats that no one would come to save her now. However, to his misfortune, the syringe is knocked from his hand, and the figure of the hooded protagonist appears before him, bringing hope to the girl. Labrice is surprised by the presence of her friend there, but all he says is that everything is all right now. And he turns, striking a cool pose, saying it was because he was there, leaving the girl speechless. She asks why he had come, and the boy explains that it was because she was crying, and he had promised that whenever she cried, he would be there to help her. The girl is surprised that he remembers this, but for Chrome, that was a very important promise, and there was no way to forget. He takes his friend's hand, calling her to come back quickly because everyone was waiting for both of them. However, amidst all that dust and confusion, Master Number 6 appears, questioning if he thought they would simply let him return, and saying that he didn't know how he got there, but he couldn't feel any mana coming from the boy, which probably meant he had used it all, and raising his wand, he declares that it was the end for that stubborn brat. Labrice observes the other wizards who had arrived at the laboratory. Without a doubt, they belonged to the first class, and now there were 5 of them. The girl begins to panic when Chrome explains that everything is fine, and feeling confident, he tells the old man that this wouldn't be the end for them. After all, he had made his childhood friend cry, and now he would pay the price. While the situation escalated, Labrice just watched, and the wizards are enveloped by an indescribable magic. Even the old man becomes destabilized, shocked to realize that he was indeed facing who they expected, the destroyer of the original dragon. This mention isn't very relevant to Chrome, who says that the creature was weaker than he imagined. All that insolence leaves the master speechless, and he calls him a monster. Even so, the other wizards do not back down, especially since he was out of mana, so it was time for the sorcerers to unite to attack him. And so they do, raising their wands, and using level 6 spells, throwing huge stones in the boy's direction. Labrice worries about her friend's safety, but even so, Chrome seems very confident. Hyped by the battle, the old man shouts for the boy to enjoy all that power directed at him. However, as usual, the protagonist uses the time stop, preventing all those arrows from hitting him. And Labrice, who had been with her eyes closed in fear of the carnage there, is shocked by what happens. Master Number 6 loses his words when challenging the boy, but soon questions what kind of spell that was. It was as if he were ignoring the very rules of the universe. Still, the boy had a trick up his sleeve, shattering those attacking stones as if they were nothing. Using only his sword, the wizards were shocked and didn't even know what to say. After all, if it weren't for that brat, their plans would have gone perfectly. Chrome knew this. He knew he was the only obstacle to moving forward with the coronation project of the new Demon King. After all, this way, the original dragon would have died on an expedition, and after that, the congregation would keep bringing one Demon King after another to life. In this manner, everything would proceed according to the organization's plans, and a terrible future would begin, but that would no longer happen. The old man was shocked and shouted to ask how much information the boy had and how he knew it. Insisting that he answer, he even tries to threaten him with magic, but Chrome shatters his wand, just like the wands of the other wizards present, and he points his sword at that now defenseless old man. Without answering his question, all the boy says is that this alternate future would end there. Labrice couldn't help but comment on how incredible that was. Meanwhile, the old man claims it wasn't over yet, and he pulls out his syringe, ready to become the next successor of the Demon King. But before he can put the needle to his throat, he is stopped by the protagonist. He had already thought of everything, and he knew the crown would bring some extras if needed. The boy stares at his empty hand, asking when Chrome had taken that, but all the boy says is that he should give up once and for all, as that was not the kind of genius that wizards of his caliber could withstand. He felt threatened and questioned how the protagonist knew that, but the boy explains that it wasn't a threat, it was just a friend's advice. And then he asked where the rest of the Demon King's cells were because he would take them all away. But before saying, the old man wanted to know what the boy intended to do with those items, something that was obvious to Chrome, who reveals that he would eliminate every trace of Demon King from that world. He was angry and determined to execute his plan, but revealing his goal might not have been the smartest choice. even though the old man said he would hand everything over to him, so he could take absolutely everything he wanted. After saying that, Master Number 6 exploded all the creation tubes present in the laboratory, something Chrome definitely hadn't anticipated. Now those demons were awake, evolving rapidly out of control. He grabs Labris to pull her out of that chaos, and the two watch the circus catch fire, while the wizards laugh, telling the boy to enjoy the terror of the Demon King's cells. In the midst of all this confusion, the boy decides to check on his friend to see if she was okay, which the girl confirms. Chrome also asks if by any chance that fluid had come into contact with her in any way, but fortunately, that hadn't happened, so he picks her up, celebrating, before questioning whether that liquid inside the syringe actually contained cells from the Demon Lord. And this question brings to mind the memories of the wizards exploding one by one after receiving that lethal injection. But he couldn't dwell too much on that, as there was a much greater impending catastrophe in front of him, which makes the girl suggest that those monsters had probably been born from the cells of the former Demon Lord. So the boy takes her to a safer spot in the room, asking her not to worry about it, but to be careful not to release any mana, which Labris would do without complaint. The boy stares at the wizards who are still standing, and the master grumbles about having done the possible and impossible to obtain those cells from the Demon Lord. In fact, he wouldn't mind if those humans accepted them inside their bodies. And holding a syringe, he claims that doing so would be even better, considering they now had a wide audience, and thus he orders his subordinates to initiate the evolution, making all of them inject that liquid without a second thought. However, just like last time, so much power in the veins of those sorcerers causes their heads to explode, and even Master Number 6 seemed to be inventing some difficulties, screaming with his powers. Quickly, the boy is engulfed by an evil aura, transforming into a giant beast. For a moment, he celebrates being the only compatible one, laughing as he realizes he has achieved his greatest goal. Meanwhile, Labris looked at the situation in horror, and the boy introduces himself as the second Demon Lord officially. While the second gloried in himself, he orders the little ones to surrender at his feet. After all, they were in front of a Demon Lord and would witness his rise from a very special place, because the great calamity was just beginning. Labris asks Chrome if that was really a Demon Lord, but his friend denies it. It certainly wasn't the case. Those guys were just rebels. He explains that that was not a Demon Lord. In fact, the boy was just an ordinary person they didn't even need to waste time on. The problem for them now was not the wizards, let alone the chimera in front of them. Suddenly, a slime on the ground gathers, forming a wave that envelops the demon, surprising him quickly, and he screams, asking what that was, as he was completely engulfed in the liquid, as if it were penetrating his skin, causing him to roar. He couldn't believe he could suffer any damage. After all, he was now the great Demon King, and all the other demons were under his command. So that must just be the fluid from the cultures, but he felt his skin burning, as if he were succumbing, and he screamed for help like a child, claiming that he didn't want to die. Until a haunting figure appeared on the horizon, frightening Labris, and then her friend stated that this one was indeed a Demon King, justifying that the wizards probably didn't think that the culture fluid could be some sort of aggregator. That was very crazy to believe, even for the girl, but it made sense. After all, there had to be a reason why the wizard couldn't control such power, but that was something our boy only noticed much later. Now, he would have to face the second Demon Lord in its most advanced life form, known by the nation as a slime, capable of devouring nations and seas. Thus, the second Demon Lord was born. The protagonist remembered that immense creature. In his past life, it had devoured countless nations and only continued to grow using its power. It was a gigantic beast, and its body was horrifying. Moreover, the ability it had was to dissolve and assimilate anything it touched, whether that thing was physical matter, spiritual, human, or even abilities. However, this Demon Lord that the boy knew was not that small, and considering the memories he had of it, it was still a week away from being born. So perhaps this prematurity was a result of his interference. Of course, before going back in time, he had thought of containment measures for that beast, but there was one problem he hadn't anticipated. In his current state, he wasn't strong enough to win. So he calls Labris, telling the two of them to flee while that creature was still busy eating the other demons. She agrees, and the boy follows, worried, as the first thing he wanted to do was keep her safe, and then he pulls her by the arm, guiding the way, using some supplements he had brought, the mana crystals that Rains had given him. And Chrome explains to Labris that he did this to mislead the Demon King. After all, he was attracted to anything that had mana, which meant that the girl he was taking couldn't use them for even a second. He locates a stone in the midst of all that chaos, stopping to mess with it, and celebrating that the object still worked. But Labris didn't know the reason for his stop and questions what he thought he was doing. To which he responds that this room had no exit or entrance, which wasn't a problem, since they would use the dungeon's teleportation to escape. Labris asks if he knew how to use it, and the protagonist explains that he had encountered that item a few times, something she questioned. He couldn't say that in his past life, when he was in the high squad of the congregation, he used dungeons like that to conduct illegal tests, but he knew that the operation varied from dungeon to dungeon. The problem with this one was that it needed to go through a giant confirmation using mana, and that was not something he could do right now. However, if he could find out the date and time of the last transfer out of the dungeon, he might be able to figure something out. The problem was that he also had no way of discovering that until he had a great idea. He remembered that this function was used to transport the originating dragon and a horde of monsters during the time of calamity, so he just needed to change the control panel to that moment. Using his time reversal abilities, the boy executes the function without problems. Then he shouts to Labris, telling her to go into the cultivation area to be transferred from the dungeon. The girl runs, but warns her friend that the Demon Lord was heading in their direction, telling him to hurry and get in there. The boy even gets close to the girl who was still in the circle, but stops suddenly, leaving her even more confused. Chrome apologizes for what he is about to do, and Labris doesn't understand at first. However, upon seeing the transfer starting, she realizes that her friend would not be going with her. The protagonist then explains that he needed to finish that creature at that moment. It could only be a joke from that crazy guy, and Labris asks if he was serious. After all, no matter how strong he thought he was, he would end up dying if he faced a creature like that alone. The girl screams, telling him to get in there quickly, especially since they had just made up and he was already ruining everything. He didn't know why he was acting that way, and Labris asks him not to leave her alone, but the protagonist is unmoved and only comments that she was being a big baby. However, he makes it clear that he would keep his promise this time, something the girl doesn't understand. Still, Chrome explains that the best moment to deal with a creature like that was in its initial state, so he had to take advantage of that to fight, because if he didn't do that, his friends and the city of Armana would be devoured by that monster's power, and then the worst would happen. The girl would become a demoness he couldn't save, despite promising to do so. That's why he tells Labris that everything would be fine, and that he had gotten stronger. She was desperate inside the tube, screaming for the boy. Even so, he insists that he worked hard and got stronger, so she didn't need to cry, assuring her that they would always be together, and he would make sure to protect everyone. Then he asks Labris to smile, so that he can keep his promise. With the girl far from there, he turns to the new lord and asks if he didn't want to start fighting, because now he was going to resolve his future once and for all. The creature stretches an arm out, taking on Labris's form in a monstrous way. Meanwhile, all those swallowed by her try to attract the protagonist, asking if he loved them and begging to join. They tried to charm him in any way possible, and that ugly creature asks if he wanted to keep playing forever, smiling devilishly, but Chrome apologizes as he pulls out his sword and quickly cuts off the Lord's hand, making it fall to the ground, with the justification that he needed to return to a specific place. And that's why he had to finish with the creature right there. But the slime asks why he did that, why he had refused that opportunity, even though he was very weak. And approaching with its hideous face, it asks if acting that way wasn't pointless. While its arm grew back again, she didn't want to know why the boy wasn't cooperating. After all, she wouldn't be alone ever again this way, because soon everyone would become part of that mess, including her family and her home. That mess would swallow the entire world and everything in its path, so that it could be integrated into its organism. She tries to reach the protagonist with her numerous hands, but he is quicker to use his abilities to dodge, getting out of there quickly. As he fled, the monster laughed like a psychopath. It was fascinated, but it knew that game of tag well. Despite its comments, Chrome kept running away. That's when the creature took advantage of its abilities to lift some stones that were hidden in that place, causing the stalactites to shatter as well, and laughing at the situation the protagonist was in. After all, now he had to try to dodge to avoid being hit by those objects too. He was so focused on that he almost didn't notice when a slime from the monster approached his foot, but luckily he managed to escape. grabbing one of the larger rocks and using it as a kind of floating platform. Up there, he aimed the sword at the demon. He was sure that this was the worst of monsters. After all, if it swallowed him alive, things would happen exactly as they did 100 years in the future. And that creature would destroy the world he knew. His friends would also be swallowed. His family, his city, and countless nations would be dinner for that mess. No one in that era could combat the Demon King in front of him. And even after many decades, it would only stop swallowing everything after being sealed. Now that he was face to face with the creature, he knew he had no advantage. After all, physical attacks weren't enough to stop it. It would also be difficult to advance time in such a way that the monster would die of old age. He also couldn't resort to the mana present in the atmosphere because the creature could swallow even that. Worse still, if he used magic against that thing, his powers would be absorbed. And the last thing he needed was for that thing to learn to use magic too. Even so, the boy needed to win, and he was willing to do the possible and the impossible for that. He stares at the item in his hand, the syringe he had kept from Master Number 6 earlier. After all, he hadn't asked about the location of the Demon King's cells just to gather them and throw them away. In fact, in his past life, he broke several taboos to strengthen himself, so there was no reason not to mess with that now. In his past life, he still didn't have qualities compatible with the cells. That's why he dedicated himself a lot to acquiring them and injected that liquid fearlessly into his neck. If he had done the same earlier, even if it was just a drop of genes, he would have died instantly. And the first 10 years of doing this were terrible. He felt an intense pain that kept him from sleeping at night, destroying his entire body. He remembered when he would even lose consciousness without being able to rest. And this torment followed him as if it were a nightmare. It took 10 years to manage to inject a drop without suffering, and 10 years later he injected 2, and so on. Little by little, our hero gained control over that power, and before he knew it, he could touch time. However, it took too long, and when he finally gained the power to protect everything and everyone, those he wanted to protect ended up being afraid of him. And Chrome became the enemy of humanity in the eyes of the citizens. He became a monster. That's how he spent his 100 years. But now it was different. He hadn't managed to become a hero, but that was okay with him. All he wanted was to save everything and everyone, so it didn't matter what kind of monster he became. After the injection, completely transformed, our boy presents himself to his new opponent as Chronogate, the Lord of Time and Space. The boy was completely different after the injection, surprising the Demon Lord with so much power, and he praises him, saying that it was incredible, and affirming that they were the same, inviting him to play with that power. After all, he would surely hand over that magic on a silver platter, and they could do so much more for the world that way. His hands quickly extend from his body towards the boy, calling him, questioning if he would give everything to him. But the protagonist asserts that such behavior was pointless, because he had been waiting for their meeting since he saw the outcome of his actions in the future. Then he pulls out his new magic spear, using the spell Chronos Zero, which begins to collapse the Demon King, who soon approaches. Trying to stop him, he felt his entire body disintegrating, and Chrome remained unbeatable, just staring at the creature from Finhar. Still, the Demon King asked how that was possible. Then, the protagonist explains that if that were indeed magic, it would have been absorbed by the monster, and every word that came out of his mouth left the creature even more shocked. However, the spell he was using had to obey the laws of that world, as it was the power of the Demon Lord. And from then on, it was his turn to play. There was born the third Demon Lord, the Lord of Time and Space, Chronogate. The young man was feared for being the strongest monster in the world, and claimed that this was his future form, revealing that his ability as a Demon Lord was the manipulation of space-time, meaning he had the power to control the law of time in that world, interfering with the very time that governed the planet. The slime couldn't believe it, screaming as it questioned how he could do something like that to him, and it was willing to kill him, saying everything it would do and describing in detail how it would dismember his limbs, dissolving him slowly and completely. However, Chrome warns that this would lead nowhere because now he was an enemy of time itself, and no existence could challenge him, and even if the slime had no end, everything in the world had a beginning. Little by little, the slime dissolves and continues begging the boy to stop, because it didn't want to end that way. After all, it hadn't experienced dreams, hopes, kindness, or love, and all of that existed for both of them in the end. However, Chrome argues that the future the creature sought had nothing but ruin, and he knew well where that would end. After devouring everything it desired, the creature would continue to cry alone in a dark and lonely void. But the monster didn't believe it at all. Ignoring this, the protagonist continues explaining that no matter how much it wanted to be loved, everything it touched would disappear. So it didn't matter how much it devoured, it would always be alone. This provokes even more fury from the slime, which says that the boy was lying. After all, a monster made based on a perfect life. No, I erased it, I know. But the protagonist insists, saying that someone programmed to be a perfect life creature would be incapable of being happy. In fact, he tried to prevent its birth in general, and since he couldn't, he wanted to allow it to have a dignified end. But that didn't make sense to the slime, because it knew that the boy's power was almost gone, and it wouldn't be able to take everything he had. But the blonde explains that he had plenty of magic available, even though it wasn't visible to that creature, so he gathers the external mana as always, indignating his opponent even more, who questions where all that power came from. And the protagonist responds that just as there was no way to quantify the amount of water a person drank throughout their life, the same applied to the magical powers that someone could maintain. And what had happened was that his magical power from his self of all times was connected to the present. Of course, if it were his past self, he wouldn't be able to use this to his advantage, and when he tried, he ended up destroying his entire family, being led by L by the hand towards the light. His previous self met incredible people, but even so, he lost everything again, experiencing 100 years of hell before becoming the strongest. And now he was there in that moment and time, exactly like a clock, going in circles forever, to end all the demon lords of the present and save everything in that present. And that sword he held would take everything back to its origin again. So our boy thrusts the blade into the chest of the mess that still had the form of Labris, using the ability of Chronos Zero and making the creature shine like a sinister shadow. The blade in its chest pierced with an incandescent glow, until it took on a watery texture, thinking how beautiful its exterior was. The girl stared at all of it in wonder, and she approached the protagonist successfully this time to ask why he was crying, questioning if they were enemies or what. But he reveals that he was like this because he was no longer afraid, he no longer felt alone, and for that reason, he invites her to finish it quickly, making the creature explode into various molecules of warm water, and finally concluding the subjugation of that being. Leaving the dungeon, the boy returned to his original form completely exhausted, regretting having absorbed so many demonic cells at once. But now, his concern was to find Labris safe, and he hoped she wasn't crying because of him. In fact, he wished for the girl to smile upon seeing him return. And then he jumped through the door. Seeing the silhouette of his friend there, he ran to her embrace. This time she was no longer crying, complaining that Chrome was an idiot and made her worry for nothing, to which he apologizes, being warmly received by the girl. When the two left the place, the dungeon doors closed by themselves. Sometime later, the boy was resting on the floor, when someone approached commenting on the warm weather. It was Ella, who was smiling as always, but she soon complained to the protagonist because she had been looking for him and the boy simply disappeared. She explains that she needed him for something, and Chrome asks if something had happened. Then she explains that her father wanted to talk to the protagonist about the Labyrinth of Soul, because they had received news about how it collapsed. And they also exposed an experiment conducted by the 6 wizards. After that, some investigation teams were dispatched from the capital, and some abducted wizards were rescued. Until then, what she knew was that the one responsible for dismantling the whole scheme became known as the mysterious hero. The girl smiled mischievously, and the boy asked what she meant, as she seemed very happy about something. Then she showed a basket full of treats, and explained that she had been making these cookies since morning, that they looked very delicious. Then she invited her friend to eat and enjoy the day. It was then that Labris appeared, questioning if her colleague had forgotten his promise that they would train that day, which had indeed been the case. So Chrome burst into laughter seeing his friend angry, and Elle praised her for her hard work as always. Plans changed, and Chrome invited the girl to train, and she agreed to cheer for both. And since she had her cookies, she didn't need much else to quietly watch the training. So it was decided. The boy smiled at the presence of his friends. Just like in his past life, he knew that the Demon King would be reborn, and the battle with the Association of Wizards would still continue. However, for now, Elle was there, and Labris too. And this time, he would protect everything that was precious to him and that he lost in the future with his own hands. Our video ends here. If you liked it, leave your like. See you next time. Bye bye.